rights and human rights issues and how they impact your daily life. My name is Charles Bryson, Director of the Civil Rights Enforcement Agency, under the auspices of Mayor Lyda Crewson, and your host. Podcast can be seen at Facebook Live, YouTube, and recorded at mycitymymusic.com. The theme song, which we do not have the rights to, is by Ronnie Jordan. Today, we are going to discuss voting in Missouri and voting in general in 2020. We have a primary coming up, presidential primary coming up, I believe, in March, and then we have other elections throughout the course of the year. With me in studio from my far right to my left are Justin Eidelberg with We Are the Change, correct?
Yeah, how you doing, Charles?
I am good. Gina Gunn McClendon, Dr. Gina Gunn McClendon, from Voter Access and Engagement Initiative at the Center for Social... Is that from the center or just from Washington U?
No, Center for Social Development.
Okay, Center for Social Development at Washington University. Mm-hmm. And Jennifer Slavic Lohman, founder of St. Louis Area Voting Protection Coalition. So thank you all for being here. Let me start with Gina. Gina, you did a study a little while back and a report on will I be able to cast my ballot? What was that study?
So thanks, Charles, for having me here today. So this was a study that we decided to do based on our own personal experiences. In 2008, for example.
And 2008, just to remind people, was the year that we had all of that backup and people couldn't vote, and the judge allowed people to, I think they extended the hours for another couple of hours, if I remember correctly.
They did. And so seeing that, and I worked and helped out at those polling places, primarily in highly populated Black communities. And so what I saw was just disturbing to me. So a few years go by, and my director, Michael Sheridan, I asked him, I said, listen, can we do something around voting? And he said, yeah, let's do it. And so with that, and he had the same experience, by the way, with lines circled all around and, just broken equipment, things like that. So that's what we decided to do. So we used a mixed methods design. We used students to go out and actually observe. So it was an observation study. The student researchers didn't actually talk to anybody, but they were there just to observe, look at, were the lines long? They were looking at wait times. We had them looking at procedures, so they were there early in the morning to see how things were set up. They were looking at the number of election judges that were there. And we purposely did 20 poll sites, 10 in the city and 10 in St. Louis County. And the reason for that is we wanted to really delve into race and income. So the places that we selected were based on race and income. So we had 4 criteria. So high population Black, high population white, higher income on both those ends, and then the opposite. So we launched that with the help of the election officials in both the city and the county, which were...
Let me stop you for a minute. Because you described this in your report, but I want to make sure people understand. In Missouri, and correct me if I'm wrong, in Missouri there's a state board of election commissioners. But also I'll use the term area, or each county has also a board of election commissioners. Am I close to correct?
That's correct.
So you have a city board of election commissioners and a county board of election commissioners.
So there are 116 counties in Missouri. So 2 of those do not, or is it 6? I think 2 or 6 don't actually have an election board. They have a county clerk that is voted in.
Okay.
But St. Louis City has its own election authority, as well as St. Louis City.
And they'll be here actually in 2 weeks. The city, they'll be here in about 2 weeks.
Exactly, yeah. And the other thing I think is important to note is that inside polling places, Missouri's law does not allow anyone to be in that space unless they are working as an election judge or poll worker or something like that. And so we were granted permission to do this with the Board of Elections, and it had everything to do with what was interesting to me, and happy to find out that our election administrators, they want people to vote. So they wanted to know what the issues were, and they saw it as an opportunity for them. So they were involved and helped us train our student researchers and the whole thing. So,
and what were some of the results that you found?
So, we definitely encountered more obstacles in predominantly black communities. So voting machine malfunctions and confusion about poll pads were reported only at predominantly black poll sites. Sites in communities with higher percentage of black residents and communities with lower income had fewer election judges, more interference with free passage of voters, for example, crowded doorways and electioneering. Long lines, a lack of seats for voters to actually exercise their right to vote. We saw things like people standing, if it was in a gym, they were literally standing up and completing their ballot, standing up, leaning on a stage in the gymnasium, things like that. We observed higher police presence at polls in higher poverty communities, but none at the low poverty, predominantly white polls. And then we were more likely to have conditions that prevented voters from completing their ballots in privacy, which is what I just talked about. But in the bigger scheme of things, black people and those with lower income face countless barriers in participating in the electoral process in general. That's pretty much the extent to what we found.
So I want to ask you one particular thing, well, two things stuck out. One is, as you said earlier, actually election judges really want people to come out and vote. And so whatever barriers may exist, aside from that, folks want to come out and vote. Mm-hmm. The second thing is, I believe in your report it talked about changes in voting sites and how they change over time. Mostly, I would argue, because of the number of people in a particular area, but also that means you may not be going to the same place 2 or 3 times in a row. Right. And so I remember going to this polling place and talking to these judges, and now it's shut down, and now I've got to go over another bus route or another public transportation route or get a caller ride or whatever to go to another polling place, which then keeps me from I just don't want to mess with it this year.
Right. And and some of that, it has to do with organizations like churches or different things. There's a law that says that elementary schools and things like that, if they are supported by public dollars, they can be poll places. But what happens sometimes is that there may be, some particular church that had been allowing voting for years and years, and they just decide, nope, we don't want to do it. And so that causes a lot of issues, and it has a tendency to happen more in the city, I think, than it does in the county. So some of those things it just happens. There's not a lot we can do about it. But the bigger, one of the things that we realized with this study, whether it's intentional or not, is it a form of voter suppression? I say it is. So the question becomes, why do conditions matter? And they have everything to do with people and their ability to vote. If I am a single parent and I'm there to vote, and I have to be at work and I'm on a bus route, it already took me an hour to get to the location, or maybe 30 minutes. I can't stand there all day long and wait to go vote. And the chances of that person coming back to vote are slim to none.
So I'm gonna counter that conversation with one that I think you'll agree with. As I was preparing for this show, the movie Mandela came in my head, and the extraordinarily long lines in that movie, which was real life because we all went through it and we all saw that, and people were in line for 8 hours or more just to get a chance to vote. But it also occurred to me that we are possibly one of the only democratic countries that don't have voting on a weekend or a holiday to vote. And so part of it is we have it on a Tuesday where everybody's got something else to do. So the Tuesday doesn't matter. It's why not make election day always a holiday and sort of push them all together, because you have April elections. Well, now we have a March primary. We may have April elections in St. Louis. I don't remember. We may have something in August, and we have something in November. That is ridiculous. So part of it may be voter suppression. Part of it may also be our unwillingness as a country to deal with making it easier for people to vote. We seem to be making it harder. And I know and you may want to talk about this briefly before I bring on the other two guests, voter ID. And that now is another, the real emphasis of voter ID and erasing people from the polls, now from the voting list, now seem to be the big ways of which we're suppressing voters.
Yes, that's very true. So fortunately, while Missouri does have the voter ID law, strict voter ID law, you can still vote the traditional way. The caveat is that you have to sign an affidavit that basically says that you don't have an ID. So here's the problem. If I take my utility bill and whatever I have to vote the traditional way, but I just happen, or I forgot to bring my ID. Now I'm signing an affidavit with my pictures. Yeah, so I'm signing something that says that I don't have one when I actually do. I just forgot it at home. So so there are a lot of issues around that, not to mention the costs. Not to mention all the things that we have to do. And then the state is supposed to pay for those underlying documents. But anyway, at this point, as of right now, Missouri voters can still vote without an ID and without having to sign an affidavit.
And that's due to a court case, correct?
That's due to a court case, okay. Yes.
And so that's in, will I be able to cast my ballot by you? And a number of other people, and I'm sure we'll talk about where to find that on the website in a minute. Okay. So I want to bring in Justin and Jennifer. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning. Thank you, Charles.
So let me start with Justin, if you will. Justin, you have, and I'll say you, and there's probably others who have helped out.
Some of these ladies right here.
Some of those ladies right here. Well, there you go. You have a organization that is working and encouraging people to vote. What's the name of it, and what's the impetus?
It's called We Are the Change. It's a voting initiative that's based off of engagement, advocacy, and educating our neighbors, or engaging with our neighbors, to help them make it to the ballot box with a racial equity lens applied.
So let me ask you, and I'll allow anybody to answer this, but I'll start with you. The premise is people don't vote. So why don't people vote?
Because they can't relate to it. They see no benefit. We talk about a lot about north of Delmar. We talk about history, talk about, having conversations with grandma and our parents. They talk about the civil rights. They seen what they thought were their victories. In our lifetime, I'm 40. I'm going to say from 40 and younger, we ain't seen no victories. President Obama was the last one. He's gone. And ever since then, now we have all these suppressive mechanisms in place. And we also have not seen the power in voting. The elders in our communities have seen it. We have not. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is we make politics relatable. And how are you going to make it relatable? You have to go talk to people where they're at. Take every lens, everything off your mind, and just start basic conversation. What would you like to see change in your neighborhood? A person might say, man, the streets messed up. We got liquor stores. We ain't got no jobs. Alrighty, so when you think about that, and when I create like different programmings around these, we talk about workforce development. What does workforce development look like for the everyday person? Do you need to go to Slate? Do you need to go down here and be a part of this new NGA movement? You know, how can we help create people these access and avenues to get to what they need to? Because without the relatability, ain't nobody gonna come. You know, that's what I see.
But isn't that why does one group of people value voting and another group of people, and I know I'm doing generalities, but this is a talk show, so you got to do that. But why do one group of people sort of believe in voting and another group of people not believe in voting? Is it because of what they see? Is it because of what they internalized?
It's probably both.
What changes?
It's probably both. I'm going to use criminal justice reform. Like I was talking to some guys yesterday. I told them, I say, hey, y'all know the judges that's locking up your friends, sending them away for 20, 30 years, right? They can relate to that. I say, you know, if you are an active voter, when the judges who come up in all these different chambers or districts, you can say, nah, we don't, you and your friends can go vote, friends and family, use social media. We don't want Judge X, Y, and Z in there because he locked up everybody from Fofo Bud. You know. You don't want to see him back in there? Them guys took one of these nice flyers I gave them. I told them they use their QR codes to sign up to vote. And I also learned out some key information yesterday from Jennifer, is that once you get out probation, all you have to do is just go fill out the card and drop it in the mail. You don't have to go through the other rigorous paperwork that you have to go with. I thought you had to go through to get your voting rights back.
Let's talk about that for a minute, because I know that's also in there. So let me introduce Jennifer.
Hello.
So you have the St. Louis area. See, now I have to kind of.
It's the St. Louis Area Voter Protection Coalition.
Thank you, because that was like 2 pages away, and you caught me by surprise.
I'm sorry.
So tell a little bit about the voter protection.
So the St. Louis Area Voter Protection Coalition is really a group of organizations, I mean, including Justin's and Gina's, who meet regularly to share resources, ideas, information, and to kind of, pool resources so that everybody's kind of on the same page with the information we're putting out there, but also organizations who might not have voting as their primary purpose can still have access to voting information that we've created for them and are willing to, let them have to distribute at their own locations.
So you're more of a coalition.
Yes.
Around just the idea of having people vote.
Yes.
So this is nonpartisan.
Right.
This is affiliated in any other way other than we want to see people vote.
Correct.
So the question I have, again, is, in your experience, why do you believe people don't vote?
Well, when we had a screening at WashU that Gina put on about with the movie Rigged, which is, yes. So when we had the panels...
And that's on your Facebook page.
Yes, which is at STLVPC, which is also our Twitter handle. So when we had that screening, Reverend DeMarco Davidson said something that I thought was really profound, and it kind of gets to the heart of maybe why people don't vote, and that is that they don't know their own power. And the way he put it was, you are so powerful and your vote is so important that billionaires will spend their money to try to keep you from voting. And it really is a deliberate effort to make people underestimate their power. I mean, that's, I think, one of the big things that happened in 2016, and it's been happening all along, is, there's the one of the ways to suppress the vote, other than all the other ways, such as, voter ID or not having early voting or whatnot. One of the biggest ways is propaganda and just convincing people that their vote doesn't matter, so then they don't vote, and that works out really well for the people who don't want them to vote.
But don't I vote people in as a protection matter, but not necessarily, going back to Justin's point, I don't vote them in to fix my streets. I don't vote them in for doing the trash or any of those things. I vote them in as protection against other forces. And that's why I vote. Which is why the drop-off between a presidential vote and a Board of Aldermen vote is so huge. Because I don't vote that. I may vote for a president to do certain things, but I don't really. I vote for my alderperson more as protection. Keep folk from harming me, not what I see needs to be done in my neighborhood or in my community. Would that?
I think that's fair, and I think that's a reason. I mean, when you look at voting overall, voting drops off across all groups significantly when it comes to municipal elections of every kind, even though...
When that should be the most important.
Right. Those are the ones who affect your daily life directly, probably in the most significant way, but I don't know that people realize how powerful their vote is, especially in those municipal elections when voter turnout is low. Literally every vote is completely critical. I mean, it can change everything in your neighborhood or your county or your city.
Justin?
If I could say this, when I think about the position our elected officials have and our leadership and how, I'll say here, I'm used to 26th Ward, and for instance, since Shamim's been in the seat, get a whole lot more community engagement. She's a bridge builder. Not to say our last alderman was not that, but
don't get me in trouble on the show.
Oh, I'm not trying to do any of that. But my alderwoman, she's been building bridges, regardless of its socioeconomics. You live on this side, I live on that side, and she's also accountable and transparent. That's something that we have historically north of Delmar have not seen. Transparency, accountability, and she brings both of those on top of having great relationships with the people that live in our ward. Like, that's awesome. So, in thinking about that, not to duplicate her greatness wholeheartedly, but how can we get some more of that going on? You know, because if you're here to help create the policies that's needed to help make our communities better, and that's what I sent you downtown to do, create the policies to make our neighborhood better. Create it. Go do a study session with the people who've already done it. But everybody's blind, Charles. They don't have access to those resources.
Yeah. Well, you know, as during part of this conversation, what kept resonating in my mind is the idea that there isn't a culture of voting.
Yeah.
You know, and so the people that I work with, Jennifer and others, we talk a lot about that. And I grew up in a culture of voting. You know, my mother took me to the polls to vote. I watched the news and you know, with them and things like that. And so I just kind of anecdotally just would stop and ask younger people, do you vote? And why do you vote? And many of them, you know, it's my vote doesn't matter. But those that do vote say that they understand it's their civic duty and that it's their right and that they grew up in a culture of voting. So what I'm trying to do, as well as other groups, is just sort of create this culture of voting. We have to start somewhere. And maybe it is pushing more voting at the local level. Maybe it's just getting people to get registered to vote and then follow up with the next step, because we have a tendency to just register people to vote, but then we don't go back and push an agenda for them to actually go and vote or figure out ways to get them to the polls. So, you know, I just think that
you say that, and it's actually one of my questions, because it's true. Is, you know, I'm not going to mention names, but there's a lot of groups out there that do a lot of voter registration, and you see it all the time. And yet, I don't see any changes in the number of people who vote. In fact, I would argue that it has declined. So maybe voter registrations have jumped up. Great. But the actual voting going into the booth has gone down. And so I'm wondering, I'd like to see less voter registration, more voter education, and I'll use the word enforcement, go to the polls. It just, to me, there seems to be everybody's happy because I've registered 100 people to vote today. Out of that 100, if one only votes, then what really have I done?
Well, I think one of the big problems you're facing is that Missouri has among the most restrictive voting laws in the country. We don't have early voting. We don't have weekend voting. A lot of other states do. Our registration process is more complicated than it needs to be. Even to register online, you have to have a touchscreen, which not everybody has, and then that leads to problems with signature matching. So that kind of spirals as well.
What's signature matching?
So, like, if you, when you sign up to vote, you sign the voter registration card. And, for example, if you then sign a petition for Medicaid expansion or whatnot, in order to verify your signature on that Medicaid expansion petition, they will match it against the signature on your voter registration card. Well, if you're signing that with your fingertip on a touchscreen, it's probably not going to match as closely. So that creates some problems as well. But it's mostly about how hard it is to vote. I mean, it's one day, whereas most places have either early voting or no excuse absentee voting. We don't have either one.
I think Oregon has mail-in voting.
Yeah, several states now have vote by mail, and their obviously voting rates have skyrocketed. Another big problem that you run into in Missouri in particular is that when you move between the boundaries of an election authority, like if you move from the city to the county, you are no longer registered to vote in Missouri. You have to re-register. You are dropped from the rolls completely. So that causes a lot of problems in this metro area, especially among people who tend to move somewhat frequently. I mean, most people don't know that that's a rule. So you can move 3 blocks from, the city limits to the county, and you are no longer a registered voter. And I think that's really something that needs to change.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree. I think that Missouri is way behind the times on purpose for issues related to voting. Let me ask you, Jennifer, you first, and then Justin. We have a presidential primary coming up on March 10th.
You're right.
I am interested in 2 things. One is, do either of you deal with other issues, or just the process of voting? And what are your plans to get people to the polls for March 10th?
So our organization deals with, registration, engagement, whatever. We're really a coalition, so it kind of depends on what other organizations want to do. With respect to the presidential primary, Missouri has a non-binding primary. That's why it's called the presidential preference primary. So it's not really, I'll just be completely honest, it's not a huge priority for me personally to get people out for that primary. To me, it's more important to get people out for municipal elections and then the state, county, city primaries in August, and obviously the general election in November.
So you're not the presidential primary is like your ads here, but you're more interested in what's going to happen, and
right.
I guess August is when the municipal elections happen. Justin, what about you and your efforts?
I pretty much ditto what Jennifer said, but at the same time, create the activities that's necessary, the education piece. And during those education pieces, people learn, because like the name of We Are the Change, we know what we want to see fixed. Okay, so how do you get a band of people, like, let's go back to kindergarten. You like red, you like criminal justice reform. You break it down and have the people with the relatability to build a bond while they're here working and learning with each other, and to go back and display that back into their neighborhoods and their networks. Take back what you learned to your neighborhood organizations and share. Go back, sign up for another one, because we got a lot of stuff that we all care about, that we need to know about, the facts about, so we can go advocate and educate and even push our elected officials for the change that we do want to see that's not already on the books, or maybe it can be an amendment. But we got to create the time and the space for people to get educated and for them to understand, regardless if you from the trap house or you up here on the hilltop at Washington University. We all have something that we care about, because we all care about the quality of life that we and our children live in.
But doesn't that also hurt the dynamic, because it's in some way, shape, or form, this will be a question. Doesn't it sort of hurt the dynamic because some people believe that they are being stepped on by other people, and so there's not that uniformity? There's that whole issue about when we talk about African Americans and, well, what do we want to be for life? You get to that strata of, well, some people want some things that inherently conflict with what others want.
Well, that's for people to make their own choices to do when they're away from us. I can't control that, nor can anyone else. But while we're here together, Let's work on something that's going to better everyone else. You know, I don't care if you're a Republican, Green Party. I don't care about none of that. What I do care about is everybody being understanding of, one, each other's opinions, two, and let's get this work in. Because if we tired of what's going on like right now, we're gonna have to go get some people. We talk about the civil rights and what all the great works they did. They had to educate the people. Because as we talk about the hurdles that a lot of people have, you know, some folks work second and third shift, and that's usually a lot of times when the work is going on. But if you send a representative and you can take that back, all righty, I look at this on my way on the bus, on the Metro Link, or however I'm getting back home from work before I go to sleep. Okay, you leave this on your table, your wife, your girlfriend see this. She gonna ask you about this. You know, and we just keep going. We ain't worried about what everybody else got going on. Because if you live in South County, you mess with me, your views may be different. I don't care. That make good conversation and dialogue. I ain't gonna hate you. Matter of fact, let's go get a beer afterwards. You know.
Not a glass of wine, but a beer.
St. Louis, ain't it?
True. You know, come back to you for a minute. So this notion that that there are people out there who are on purpose suppressing the vote is disturbing, because it implies, I think, we're not talking about Democrats, we're not talking about Republicans, but we're talking about something else that is, at the end of the day, guiding these processes. Does that concern you at all, and how do we put that in context?
Well, it absolutely concerns me because for multiple reasons, but one in particular is this. You know, voting is part of our democracy, and suppressing those votes, to me, creates this erosion of democracy. And if we don't, you know, this is a place where everyone has a right to be heard, and to be heard through their vote. And I think it's unfortunate that these kinds of things are happening. And the more it happens, the worse things get. Because I think it also creates more disillusionment. If you go and you vote and you're told that you can't vote, or your name was taken off the rolls. I mean, there are example after example about how people have been voting their whole life, and they go to the polls and they're told that their name has been taken off. So all of this stuff is, to me, very sinister. It's intentional. And if we don't fight for it, then it's just going to get worse. And we won't have a democracy. We just won't have it at all. And part of the things that, and Jennifer will probably talk more about this, is how do we protect the right to vote? And so we're both engaged with the Election Protection Coalition, which is a national movement. And Missouri has a strong Missouri Election Protection Coalition where people are able to call an 800 number, 800-866-OUR-VOTE. And
R as in R.
No, it's OUR.
OUR. Okay.
Oh, right.
Yeah, that would make 7. That would make 7.
So I'm at the poll and I have a problem. I can call that number, and that someone will answer it from Missouri, an attorney, and I tell them what's going on. And then that's how things like extending the timeline for people to vote, things like that happen, because those attorneys will do a lawsuit right on the, right at that moment. But the big thing is that it gives people, it helps them understand that they do have power. There's somebody that they can call, and it's important. And we went to a national meeting early in December, and maybe one of the things that we were really kind of focused on is this misinformation and disinformation, which is another form of voter suppression. And I'll let Jennifer talk more about that. She went to that particular workshop.
Go ahead, Jennifer.
It was really interesting. So there have been some very significant efforts with disinformation and misinformation, particularly directed toward voters of color in the last few elections. And it's really something as, insidious as memes on the internet, which you wouldn't think would be that terrible, but in fact really tend to influence people the way that they target folks with, messages that resonate with them that kind of surround the disinformation, and then they pop the disinformation in the middle of those messages that are otherwise, true and compelling. And so people are a lot more likely to believe it, and they use legitimate accounts to amplify these messages and to give credibility to the disinformation accounts. So, I mean, it is a real thing. It's a real problem. It probably had a lot of effect on turnout in 2016. And so the workshop that we went to was about how you counter that disinformation within your own organizations. And, most of the time you don't want to repeat the false information because then you're just reinforcing it. You instead want to say, this is the truth rather than somebody said this, but the truth is this. You don't want to do the myth versus fact thing. On the other hand, sometimes you have to repeat the lie in order to make people understand that it really is a lie. But in doing that, you have to first say, people who don't want you to vote are saying X, Y, and Z. And then, give the correct information after that. It was a really interesting workshop. And, when I looked at some of the underlying information, like some of the reports about how this played out in 2016, I actually recognized some of the accounts and memes that were used, and it was shocking that somebody, anybody could do, with a free app and access to the internet. I mean, you can kind of manipulate the outcome of a huge election. It's frightening.
Mm-hmm. I remember way back when I was younger, we having mock voting in grade school. Mm-hmm. Do we need to go back to those premises in order to encourage the next generation, whatever that might be, to vote? Are there other ways that we can look at how we mentally train people to vote on a regular basis?
Well, one of the things that we sort of in line with what you just talked about. So in addition to our research, we've been focusing on how to support the community, how to get people more engaged. And so I learned of a documentary that Jennifer mentioned, RIG, the Voter Suppression Playbook. And so that was a tool to get people interested in, because in that particular documentary, it lines out 10 different real plays, real things that are happening to suppress the vote. But what we also did after showing that film, we had a post panel to discuss the merits of the film and things like that. But the other key piece we had was a call to action, and Jennifer helped, we designed a card that says, okay, you saw this, you're in awe, what are you going to do about it? What can you do? And people literally raised their hand and said, well, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. So creating that kind of buzz. Then one of the people that was in the audience is an alum of Northwest High School, and she wanted to bring it to that school. And so we actually met with the principal and the assistant principal to talk about how do we create a culture of voting among young people. So we went over there, we talked to them, we thought the film could help, but we wanted to know, what do you think about this? So the principal and the vice principal over there actually showed the film to 12 of the kids. The kids came back and said, whoa, this is too heavy for us. It's so much information that we don't know anything about this. Can we start at a different level? And what they said is that we need to have voter education in every single classroom, not just history, every single classroom. And this is what the kids said. We don't know enough to make decisions, and we need to learn this earlier than later. So that's, it's, I'm making, the point I'm making is that people want to know. I think there are more people out there that want information about voting and how to vote and what to do than there aren't any, because that gives you power. If you know that you have a way to fight back, people will fight back. It's silly for me to think that, but that's what I believe.
That's why it's key to have everybody at the table, including our youth, and being intentional and bringing our youth to the table, because we're setting them up to lead. And they're going to be the leaders reading our region, country as a whole. So we have to make sure that their voices, and especially on something big as this upcoming election. There's a lot of people out here doing a lot of work around youth engagement, around voter education. And I can't wait to see what those numbers look like after this election, to see how many new youth that graduated high school that participated in this election, and also like the movements that they could be possibly gearing up to do now as 2020 is kicking off. This is going to be exciting.
It is. And one of the other things, too, that the kids over there are doing, they have an initiative around criminal justice, because, let's face it, that's where they are. They live it. They see it. And so it wasn't a big leap for them to understand that criminal justice ties with voting. So Justin was talking about this quite a bit during this conversation about how important it is to connect people with voting and what they care about.
I understand that, but I also strongly think that, I'll take this away from voting for just a minute. Voting appears to be one of the only ways that people can get involved, and therefore, if I miss that opportunity, then I've basically shunned the process, versus finding other methodologies on a non-voting day for people to get involved in government, whether it be city government, county government, state government, etc. So we're not creating total systems for democracy. We're creating individual systems for democracy. Would that be fair?
I think that's fair. Well, but to go back to your original question about having mock elections at school and things like that, I think that is really important, because just, human nature is that you don't want to do something when you feel like you don't know how to do it, that's a little intimidating. I remember back when we had the kind of ballots where you had to punch it with the stylus. That always made me so nervous. I was always so worried. It's like, have I done this right? I mean, I would feel legitimately anxious when I went into the voting booth. And so...
You were one of those hanging Chad.
Yeah, exactly. And apparently my fear was founded. So, we need to have, it's also, not only do kids need to do mock elections at schools, but there's also an opportunity for high school students to really help out on election day. Both the city and county election boards have programs where kids who are, I think, 16 and 17 years old can go in and work in the polling places and assist the poll workers, which is super helpful, because I thought at first it was a joke when one of the directors of elections said that their average poll worker age was what? Was 70,
75.
Oh, yeah. And it's apparently that's true. And I have been a polling place supervisor before, and in going into the trainings, one of the biggest obstacles to training was some of the older folks were really uncomfortable with the technology. So you spend all this time talking about how to turn on a poll pad and very little time talking about the rules about, voter eligibility and so forth. So having younger people in the polling place, but also getting more people to sign up to be poll workers. I mean, every election authority we've talked to has said the same thing, that election day would go a lot better if they had more poll workers. And in places like North City and North County, I mean, since every step of the process in a polling place has to be done by a bipartisan team, so every single position has to have, a Democratic and Republican counterpart. They are having a hard time finding Republican poll workers in North City and North County. And that means that they aren't as well staffed because they don't have the bipartisan teams. So any way that there could be more poll workers would be really helpful.
And the whole process has to stop. If there isn't that, the Republican and the Democrat in that space.
If you have to go, if you're not ADA accessible and you have to go outside to allow somebody, use that term loosely, allow somebody to vote.
The curbside voting.
Yeah, both a Republican and Democrat have to wait, hold the line up, and go outside and do however many minutes it takes to do that, and then come back in. So,
right. So
yeah, and that's
a problem.
You raised another really important point too, and that's about people who would find it difficult to go to polling places that aren't accessible. There is an alternative for folks who have physical challenges that would make it difficult to either access a polling place or stand in line for long periods of time. And I think what one of the election directors said, that if you have a difficult time standing for a half hour, then you should really consider being a permanent absentee voter. And, you can apply with your local election authority, become a permanent absentee voter. A couple of benefits: you are sent an absentee ballot application automatically every election. And when you return your ballot, it does not have to be notarized, as most other absentee ballots have to be.
Like college students.
Yeah, like college students. And how many college students even know what a notary is?
True. Or where to find one.
Yeah, so that's a barrier. It's a kind of a separate barrier. But the one barrier, curbside voting. I've actually done that working in a polling place, and that can take a really long time. And when you've got people backed up, they're not happy about. Nobody's happy. The people waiting outside to vote aren't happy. The people who are waiting in line to vote aren't happy, and the poll workers who suddenly find themselves short-staffed aren't happy. So permanent absentee status is something that people should look into if it is going to be a challenge for them to get into the polling place.
We might want to remind the people that are listening that St. Louis County has new voting machines.
Yes.
Yay.
And there's an open house today if people want to go up to the Board of Elections in Northwest Plaza, the County Board of Elections. They're doing a mock election, and you can use the new machines, which are print-on-demand ballots. So it's all paper ballots. Nothing's connected to the internet. And everybody is, going to get the correct ballot because they're printing it individually for you. So there's no poll worker, picking them out of a stack. So it seems like a great system. If people want to try it, I think until 4 o'clock today, you can go up there and try it.
So an odd question that I would have for the three of you is, part of the reason people don't vote is because they don't necessarily see themselves as Democrat or Republican anymore.
Yeah.
Who wants to go first?
I'll take it slightly, because a big part of my work, or our work, is to go in communities north of Del Mar, where people don't participate in the census. They don't participate in a lot that we would say normal, middle class, and well-to-do people in our region participate in. So you have to go here and talk to these people. We have to do some unconventional things to get some unconventional results. And by us being here in St. Louis, they've been, since Ferguson, they've been saying we're the epic center of change. If we're the epic center, we got some exceptional people here. And, leading, folks who's willing to stand for those that are leading, and let's lead them to the right direction. Whatever that direction may be, and it's up to them who they want to line up with. But point blank period, we got to get y'all out to vote. You talked about it earlier, how, we register a lot of people, but people don't come out to vote. And that's where the relatability comes in. That we got to talk to people on the facts that they care about. Folks, middle-class America want to talk about health care. These people want to talk about affordable housing. How y'all going to make my utility bill lower? Those are the type of things. And once you can help people understand that, you vote for this candidate, whoever it may be, this is what they're on. This is the stuff they're going to do, or they say they're going to do. You write them a letter, postcard, whatever, to get their attention. And now you're a part of the change that we want to see, or at least that you want to see.
But I can see how the partisan system can be alienating to some people. Especially if you look at the city and county, for the most part, the state legislative districts are kind of carved in stone. They're either Republican districts or they're Democratic districts. So the real, election, quote unquote, is during the primary in August. And, when people go to that primary in August, they may not be happy about having to say, well, I'm going to select a ballot for this political party. And in fact, you do hear people push back about that sometimes. They don't understand why they know that this is essentially going to determine the outcome of the race, because the person will probably run unopposed in November.
And oddly enough, so go back to part of the conversation with Gina, the at some level, the Democrat and Republican parties connive with each other to make sure there's not a third party, a Green Party, a Libertarian Party. And so part of it is we don't mind fighting against each other, but we ain't letting nobody else into this game.
I think that's somewhat fair. I mean, building a true multiple party system has to start at the very bottom level, in order to build a party to become eligible for getting on the ballot in different spaces. And, to have, let's face it costs money. So you have to, create the apparatus. You have to have the rules. You have to meet the threshold for getting on ballots with signatures and whatnot. So, yeah, it's a really difficult process for anyone other than a Democrat or a Republican to get on a ballot and be a viable candidate. Again, probably the best way to do that is to start at the really super local level. Then you're more likely to have that happen. And then you might actually have a contested election in November, which is great because then people will feel like they have a reason to come out and vote in November rather than saying, well, all of my local and state races were decided in August, so I don't need to vote in November.
I know there's one candidate on the Democratic side who financially could all on his own become the Green Party and did some of the things that you're talking about. He chose to do something different, but that's just.
Well, money in politics is a whole other conversation.
Right, exactly.
So the three of you all here represent three different organizations. What other organizations are involved in this fight that people need to know about?
Well, there's the St. Louis Area Voting Initiative that has a very similar mission. They have a specific focus in Black communities. So what they try to do is support different organizations that are doing work around voter registration, access to voting, as well as voter protection. They also, one of the better things that they like to do and are good at is our candidate forums. So now we're talking about that knowledge, creating a knowledge base for people to understand who those candidates are and why it's important for people to understand who they're voting for. It's important. Let's see, what else? There's
the League of Women Voters has been around forever, and they usually hold a lot of candidate forums and are present, in many different spaces. I think their website is vote411.org, and they do have a lot of candidate information about what's on the ballot. So I think that's really helpful too.
Election protection, and then there is it Action St. Louis?
Yeah, you got Action St. Louis, the Deaconess Foundation.
The organization that Jamala
OBS.
OBS, they're involved with voting.
I haven't heard churches yet.
That I don't know.
Churches, it gets a little tricky because now you're talking about a threat to their 501c3.
But they can be involved in nonpartisan voter registration and stuff.
They can, but they have a tendency to stay away from it. Like, for example, I work at WashU. I have to be very careful about what I do. So, for example, I considered doing a candidate forum. Well, in theory, I could because I'm inviting all the parties. But then there could be an appearance of, and so I'd just rather not be on the news.
But with respect to churches, the St. Louis Area Voter Protection Coalition is happy to help any church who wants to go out and register voters. There are a lot of resources where you can actually identify houses where there are people who are eligible but unregistered. You can get a map to canvass them. and, go door to door and register voters. If people want to do that, then we'll put together a canvas packet for any church who wants to say, go out after church and work their neighborhood with this map and, get those folks registered. I mean, we're happy to do that, and I'm eager to do that, actually. So if anybody wants to take advantage of that, email Jennifer at stlvpc.org.
Yeah, then there are a lot of tools out there that people as individuals can just use. Go ahead.
And our with the We Are the Change, some of our sponsors were churches. You got Union Christian Avenue, Pilgrim Church, New City Church. Those are 3 churches, and they're strong supporters in helping us get out the word, not just in their congregation, but to the people that they serve and things of that nature. So I can say from that, not to say that anybody else is not, but churches, as you know, have a strong reach, especially depending on where you go in North Delmar, they have lots.
Gina, doesn't this feel like, because you and I serve on this, doesn't this feel like the same conversation about the census?
Yeah, it absolutely
without the
does.
barrier part, but some barriers, but it sort of feels like the census conversation.
The same thing exists, yes. And so the census is this year, and there is a coalition. The city has one, as well as the county, to try to get people to be counted. But the same barriers exist. One in particular is the hard to count communities, which have been identified by the Census Bureau in St. Louis and City and St. Louis County, are the same areas that people are not willing to go and canvass and to work and things like that. So it's very very similar. One, I'm working with Dr. Sean Joe at the Brown School, and we are hoping or creating a system where we're focusing on black males 18 to 29, and there's more information will come out earlier in February. But the idea is to reach as many black males in those communities as possible. And there'll be a toolkit that talks about the census step by step. And the idea is, and what Dr. Joe is doing, is connecting with different organizations and training them on the steps that they have to do in order to make sure that people are counted as well as vote. And so the idea is, so if it's a particular organization, or let's say it's an employer, the goal is to have the employees all trained. And then if they're trained, then maybe they'll tell their kids, or maybe they'll take that same information to a church or something like that. So stay tuned for that. It's called Black Man Count. And it's under the auspices of Homegrown STL, which is an initiative that is directed by Dr. Sean Joe at the Brown School.
That would be very important, and certainly if you want to come back and come on the show and talk about it, we'll certainly make time for that, because I think that's a very crucial element, is to reach 18 to, you said 29?
18 to 29 black males, yeah.
Yeah, because they have likely stayed in place on purpose, not on accident, and they need to see themselves as viable resources for the community. So,
and the other thing too is that he's hoping that that the black males will actually be hired to be enumerators, because that's going to be the big piece. So, and as Charles, I'm sure, I don't know if you've had a podcast on this, but with the census, they're going to do a mailing, but not necessarily everybody's going to get a mailer.
True.
Well,
but part of that logically is people have moved between that time, and so I think sometimes we choose to believe that there's something there, whereas if I'm doing a mass mailing to, I don't know, however many people in the United States, I'm going to miss some folks just because they moved between the time I got my last update and today. But you're right. There's a lot of pressure. I'll say it on purpose on making sure we have enumerators in the community to go door to door, and that's on us to make sure that takes place.
Right. Right. Exactly. So, and so for the rest of the voter access and engagement initiative, we'll continue with our research. We are doing a second analysis of our research report that we did in November 2018, and we'll just keep pushing and trying to do the best we can.
Well, hopefully people will take your information and make sure that they're voting. I guess as Board of Election Commissioners, they're doing what they need to do in terms of ensuring people have the opportunity to vote. But again, I would say this, it's on us to also push your neighbor out the door, down the street, and get them to the voting booth, as well as fill out your census. So with that, we'll start with Jennifer. You once again get to do the commercial. So how do people reach you, talk to you, etc.?
So our Facebook page is at STLVPC. That's also our Twitter handle. And anybody who wants general information about our organization can either email me, Jennifer at stlvpc.org, or they can email info at stlvpc.org. And I really encourage everybody to get involved, at least to the extent of checking their own voter registration personally. I do know many people who have been dropped from the rolls who shouldn't have been. So, please check your registration, and if you feel that you've been dropped wrongly, call 1-866-OUR-VOTE.
I feel like I did show last week on credit score, and so your first thing you do in the year is you check your credit score. Second thing you do is your voter registration. Would that be fair?
I think so. Yes, definitely.
In this day and age.
And there are actually some, I guess, groups out there who will monitor your voter registration for you. I think if you text VOTE to 50409 and sign up through there, they will actually monitor your voter registration and text you if something changes.
All righty then. Dr. McClendon?
Okay, so to find out more information about voter access and engagement, just Google the Center for Social Development at the Brown School, Washington University, St. Louis. We have our webpage. You'll be able to find it, our report there. You can also find us on Facebook as well as Twitter. And then my email address is ggunn@wustl.edu.
We'll try and get that up on the webpage. Justin Eidelberg, thank you. And your information.
You can find We Are the Change, STL on Facebook. That's the only platform that I've had time to do. I've been on holiday for a while, so please excuse me. You also can find me by my email, which is Jiddleberg, as my friend says. It's JIDLEBURG@gmail.com. And you can find me out on Twitter as Berg J. Having a lot of fun, you all. Talking about equitable change. That's what we talk about a lot. But how do we bring that to where the people understand what it is so they don't get finessed anymore and we get the best results? And we can all be St. Louis made and have no more poverty, or very low poverty. I can't say we're going to get rid of it. But how can we help develop our region as a whole where we all have an opportunity to thrive, not just those that have, but those that don't have, and move up the ranks a little bit? Everybody can't be Warren Buffett, but somebody can be a nice CEO somewhere here, their own little empire.
True.
Right.
Well, I'm going to invite you all back probably for the November election to have this conversation again. Because that time, a lot of things have gone on, a lot of changes. I won't let you do Election Day because that'll be the monster. But maybe in late October, we will have this conversation about voting. Thank you all for being here today. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you
Thanks
for having us. Wow, this was awesome.